Hello, everyone. Hello. It's good to see you all. Welcome to our episode tonight, Daughters of Qayin. If you're new to the show, I'm your host, Jasmine, and this is
I'm your lovely co-host, Estradia.
Period. And today we're going to be kind of talking about the witch's devil once again, for us being the Daughters of Qayin, hence the live stream's name. But we're going to be talking about a book, a fiction recently that we've read. Delightful, wonderful book. I want to give a disclaimer now that there's going to be spoilers. So if that's not something that you're interested in like hearing, I do have a review video up on my channel that doesn't have spoilers in it. So if you are interested in reading this book, but you don't necessarily want to have it spoiled, you can go watch my review video and go check it out and get a vibe. But we're going to be talking about it in great detail, probably for at least an hour and a half, if not maybe a little bit longer. So yeah. Um, but thank you all for joining. So I have my hard copy right here. This is the book by Brahm. This was my first time actually reading any of Brahm's work.
This was not my first time. I read the Peter Pan one.
Is that the Lost Gods one?
No, I can't remember. Basically, Peter Pan is super evil and creepy and steals and kills kids, I think.
I mean, sounds on brand.
Yeah, it's Brom likes a spooky horror story kind of vibe. I do not have the hard copy, but I listened to the audiobook version.
It's The Child Thief.
That's it.
Thank you, Haley. Good to see you, Blood. Good to see you, Jay. Good to see you, Rhonda.
Let me change my view so that I can see what people are saying in one of the chats, because I can't see anything from here. So my screen might get messed up for just a second.
Okay. Hold, please. Hold, please.
Please hold, because I would like to see what all you beautiful people are saying.
So I'll talk a little bit about the book while she does that. So the book, okay, it's about 200-ish pages. I will say that for myself, I have not really been a huge fiction reader really up until this book. Most of the books that I read tend to be more nonfiction and more just like almost exclusively like occult or witchy or horticulture, folklore, pagan, paranormal, esoteric, and that sort of category. So this was really like my first kind of introduction to nonfiction. And I had been recommended by this by several different witches, like by 3 different witches within about a lunar phase, to check this book out. And for me personally, if I keep getting recommended something multiple times, especially if it's by like trusted friends and like multiple friends have recommended this book to me, I'm likely to go at least check it out. And, you know, I was a little bit hesitant about it, like I said, because I don't typically read a lot of fiction. But I really, really enjoyed it. And honestly, like this might be one of my favorite nonfiction books to date. Or fiction books to date, I guess I should say. Overall, I would give it a 10 out of 10, maybe a 9 or 10 out of 10, I would say. So let me read you a little bit about what it's about. So the book takes place in Connecticut, 1666. Do you see what Brahm did there? Iconic. An ancient spirit awakens in a dark wood. The wild folk call him Father, Slayer, Protector. The colonists call him Slewfoot, Demon, Devil. To Abitha, a recently widowed outcast, alone and vulnerable in her pious village, he is the only one she can turn to for help. Together, they ignite a battle between pagan and Puritan, one that threatens to destroy the entire village. leaving nothing but ashes and bloodshed in its wake. If it's a devil you seek, then it is a devil you shall have. This terrifying tale of bewitchery features more than 24 of Brahms' haunting paintings, fully immersing readers in this wild and unforgiving world. Doesn't that sound good? Just right off the bat. The back of the book, we have some, like, I guess, critics or reviews. First of all, the art in this book, my cover is so dirty. I'm sorry, guys, but the art in this book is amazing. Praise for Slewfoot, a lusciously dark tale of witchcraft and devilry. This book was tailor-made for lovers of folk horror and everyone who wants to live deliciously. Slewfoot takes hold of the maxim sympathy for the devil and yanks hard on that literary taproot, unearthing a far more elemental and complex truth. At the crossroads of victimhood and vengeance, Abitha makes her choice and blood follows. So those were some of the reviews. This roughly costs about $30. And it $39.99 Canadian. Another thing I will say about this, I am not a published author at this time. However, I have a deep respect for Brahms' work, considering not only is he the author, but he's done all of the illustration too. And these are paintings. These aren't even just like digital media or drawings. These are like oil paintings, I'm pretty sure. So the fact that he's written the book and done all of the art for it, that's kind of like, I don't know, a double whammy in a way, because how many people are gifted in both of those spheres of the arts, you know?
The art in that book is beautiful. And the story is every bit as good as the art that's in it.
It was a real page turner for me.
It really was. It was
a real page turner. I will say that when I got this book, I read it within 24 hours. Like literally, I got it, I think around 4 p.m. on like a Thursday. And I stayed up all night reading it. And then I literally took it to work with me. And I finished a couple chapters at work in between clients. And then I came home. And before even getting out of my work clothes, I sat right here on my futon here in the witchy room where I'm sitting right now. And I finished this. Also, I read this book to a dark academia soundtrack on Alexa. So 10 out of 10, highly recommend doing that. And I think that the audiobook, no, 10 divided what? No, Alexa.
Math is hard, babe.
The audiobook is the person who does narration, like British or something.
Yes.
So that's a vibe. I know that Crafton was listening to the audiobook also. So if you prefer more of an audiobook version, it's available as an audiobook also. What was your experience listening to the audiobook? Because you read it that way, right?
Yeah, I listened to the audiobook. I have this weird issue where reading fiction doesn't mesh well with my ADHD for some reason, but I can sit and listen to a fiction book. And this is probably one of the best books I've listened to in a long time. I mean, I've listened to quite a few audiobooks recently. Slewfoot really kept me engaged. The woman who did the read through, she was really good at doing various voices for different characters. She was really good at evoking the feeling of the book. And I just generally and genuinely loved every bit of this book, especially the end, but I loved every bit of this book. And I feel like, especially for those of us who are practicing witches, Abitha, the character Abitha, is very relatable in a lot of ways for some of us. I just really loved it.
Well, let's talk about Abitha. So Abitha is the main character. Hashtag relatable. Some info to know about her. This is kind of where the book is taking off. So basically, Abitha's mother was a cunning woman. I don't remember exactly where they're from.
In England.
England, roughly somewhere in England. Yeah. Um, but Abitha's mother is a cunning woman, and her father is like a bit of an alcoholic. And her mother actually ends up passing away, and her father kind of falls into like his addictions and his alcoholism, and also starts kind of becoming quite religious in his Catholic faith. And he essentially ends up selling his daughter, Abitha, who I think she's around the age, like, she's going on 19 or going on 20, I think, in the book, right?
I think at the beginning of the book, when she is officially on the farm with Edward, she is 20, because I believe she says she's 20. I think when all this stuff with her mother went down, like, you went over that her mother's like dead and everything, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. After her mother passes and her father goes ballistic, I think she's somewhere in the realm of like somewhere between like 17 and 18, I think, maybe younger than that.
Well, her father essentially sells her to the new world. So there's some sort of program going on where they're trying to get brides in the new world, in the new colonies. And so he sells Abitha because he's broke, because their family mostly survived off of her mother's cunning craft, basically working as a midwife, doing herbal remedies, healing, art, poetry also as well, jewelry making, a slew of things, really. And so he decides that he's going to sell Abitha to the new world, and she kind of ends up being forcibly married to Edward, which I was kind of like already like, but I actually ended up really liking Edward.
Edward's sweet. Edward was a really great character.
Yeah, you almost kind of really like Edward. And so this is definitely not a spoiler because it says so early on in the book. She does become widowed. So one of the first chapters, I think it might be chapter 1 or chapter 2, their goat goes missing. And to kind of paint the scene a little bit, like, so basically they're living in Connecticut. I don't remember what the town is called in Connecticut they're living in.
Sutton.
Sutton, yes. And Sutton is basically kind of like this small puritanical village, and it's got like big wooden piked fence around it. So outside of Sutton, on the edge of town, between being in town and being on the wilds, so outside of the border wall of the small town, um, Edward has a little homestead on the edge of basically what they call the wilds. And the land is not necessarily super profitable. And you find out that Edward is renting this land from his brother, Wallace. And Wallace is kind of your stereotypical villain. Now, I will say one critique I have that I've also heard echoed by some other people is that Wallace, the villain, the bad guy of the book, is a little flat.
Wallace is, I don't necessarily know that it's that he's flat. I think it's that he's stereotypical and expected.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing different.
There's no dimension. He's flat. That's what I would say.
I mean, I guess. I just don't think there's anything special or different about him as a villain other than, I don't know. No. Yeah, you're right. He's flat.
So, okay, they're basically almost done making their like rental payments or mortgage payments to Wallace. And then they're going to be owning the farm. And the property is technically owned by Wallace. And like Edward's just been making these payments. And Wallace has his own farm as well, but Wallace tried to grow tobacco, I think it was, which we know that tobacco is not necessarily going to grow super well in Connecticut. I think that's something that was typically grown in the South. And so basically, it starts the scene off where Abitha is really struggling. I think her birthday's coming up, and her and Edward are really struggling with having enough resources and food, and their goat goes missing. She chases after it, she loses it, it goes into a cave. There's something otherworldly in the cave that she, I think, believes has eaten the goat. She gets super freaked out in a mass hysteria, comes home, tells Edward. Edward thinks that she's just completely crazy. And also, Edward's brother Wallace is there.
Eating their food, drinking their drink.
And demanding the last of their honey mead.
Just being
And
a real piece of shit.
and being really misogynistic too.
Yeah. Super.
Literally has his boot on their kitchen table.
Well, and something that they kind of discuss, and this is actually true of puritanical society, is that women weren't allowed to like have forceful personalities. They weren't allowed to speak up against men. And that's something that they bring up. And Wallace loved that.
Mm-hmm.
That you can tell that the character of Wallace loves the fact that he doesn't have to listen to what women have to say or anything like that. But Abitha is not a Puritan woman. She came from England. She came from a very outspoken mother. You know, she had an abusive father, and she's not ready to take crap from anybody.
And Abitha is literally the daughter of a known cunning woman. So her trying to fit into this puritanical society, there's a lot of challenges there because they don't fully accept her because she's not, in their eyes, a good puritanical woman. Like she frequently has her hair out of her bonnet. She wears, brighter clothing, or her clothing is sometimes dirty or tattered. It's just not seen as like she's a very good puritanical woman. And I believe the town also kind of has an inclination that her mother in England was a cunning woman. And so they kind of already off the bat treat her. It's already one thing to be a woman in this society, but to be the daughter of a cunning woman, they almost kind of treat her even less than because she is a bought bride from England.
I don't know that anyone in Sutton knew about her mother. I know that a lot of their suspicion came from the fact that, one, she's an outsider, and two, it's already mildly established that she has already been doing cunning work in Sutton, like kind of on the sly.
Yeah, she was peddling some of her charms as a way to help tide them over because they weren't having very fruitful crops and they were starving. And so she was peddling some of her charms like after church and stuff to some of the Sutton women as a way to like make a little bit of extra money.
Well, and Haley just said it on here too. She was also a redhead and her hair was long. Because Sarah, who is the wife of the head minister, makes a comment to her at one point in the book about her hair being, maybe she should just cut her hair short like all the other women.
Mm-hmm.
Because basically all the other women were rocking short little haircuts that they could hide under a bonnet without fear of their hair slipping out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think in chapter 1, the bomb basically gets dropped that Wallace's crops haven't done well. And so he's wagered one of his properties as a way to start another financial endeavor. And the property that he wagered is Edward's farm. And this really pisses off Abitha because she's like, we're one payment away and now you're taking this property away from us or threatening us. Wallace gets really upset and irate because this woman is speaking out of her mouth to him like this. And it causes a lot of friction between Edward and Abitha.
Yeah, I will say, I don't necessarily think that Edward ever thought Abitha was crazy. Because I think one of the things I loved most about Edward as a character is just how absolutely in love with Abitha he was.
He didn't believe her about the cave at all, though. I think he was gaslighting her.
I don't think he was gaslighting her. I think that he had a hard time believing in superstitious things because he wasn't of that puritanical mindset that the devil was everywhere.
Yeah, and he also wasn't a super religious man either. But he ends up going to the cave to go investigate because he doesn't believe Abitha. And he's, I think, trying to maybe make her feel more comfortable by like going to go investigate it. And he dies in the cave. Like,
gruesomely too.
Yeah.
So basically this cave is it's not a huge cave initially, but it's deep enough and dark enough that you can't see what's in it. And as you get farther to the back of the cave, there's just a pit. And that's how the goat died too, is the goat went into this cave and went into the pit and died. So what happens is Edward and Abitha have a little fight outside the cave because she's like, you don't believe me, and she storms off. And then as Edward is getting ready to leave the cave, he hears the sound of the goat bleeding. And so he's like, goat? I think the goat's name was Samson, because that's why Abitha names a certain spirit later on Samson. So he goes into the cave trying to find the goat and ends up seeing something very strange in the back of the cave, and continues to follow it and ends up falling in the pit. And, you know,
I think he like breaks his legs.
He breaks his legs, his back, like he can't move.
He breaks himself.
He breaks himself a lot. And and then he sees some of the spirits in this book, which are called the wild folk. Specifically, he sees the fish and the crow, or is
Forest and Creek and Sky, I think, were the three wildlings' names.
Yeah, so Forest, I don't think we see Forest yet. But he starts off by seeing Creek and Sky. Creek and Sky, Creek is a fish, a spectral fish that flies through the air, and Sky is a raven or a crow. And the thing that makes them super fun is that they both have the faces of children.
Yeah, so while all of this is going on, you also get another story narrative of basically these wild folk, which are essentially like fey creatures of the forest that all resemble kind of a hybrid human toddler / animal hybrid. I'll pull up some of the pictures here in the book to show you guys because there's some really awesome illustrations in the book.
Yes.
But while all of this is going on, they're trying to summon or conjure some sort of old god, spirit, entity. It wasn't super clear, and I don't think it was supposed to be super clear when they were bringing Slewfoot basically back into the physical. But this is, and yes, y'all, I broke this nail. This is Creek, who's like my favorite, and this is Forrest, who's a little
possum,
like, possum toddler boy, and then Sky is really pretty.
Yeah, I love that. I need the physical copy just for the art.
I really wish that Brom sold prints of this art because, like, I don't know. I really don't want to cut the art out of the book and put it on my wall. But
y'all get this. So Miss Jasmine over here posted about her love of the book on social media, and Brom responded.
Literally. I like had a cardiac arrest. I was like,
but so the wild folk are attempting to rouse something, and they do manage to rouse this spirit, which this spirit, who they refer to as Father, initially when he manifests very goaty. He doesn't quite have the humanoid features yet, and that's because when Samson, the goat that went missing, fell down there, Father ate the goat, and he took on that form to give him some substantiality. And then when he goes and eats Edward, because he does eat Edward, he gains more of that humanoid goat sentience that he basically has throughout the majority of the book. The way that they describe Father throughout the majority of the book is that he bears this form of like something like a hulking man goat kind of thing, but his body is made out of like shadows, and his eyes are these pinpricks of silver light. And he's got kind of like a scally goatee head face.
Well, and something that I want to touch on in the stream is like this sort of tradcraft idea of like different seasons of the devil is kind of also represented in this book, because at first he starts off more as like a spectral figure, and then he kind of becomes more in the flesh, and then there's sort of different transformations that Slewfoot goes throughout the book that kind of, to me, represents the different seasons of the witch's devil.
Mm-hmm. So the major thing that the wild folk are trying to do once their father is up and about is they're like, you need to go and kill all the people because the people are bad and they're destroying the land. And they also explain to him about Pawpaw, which Pawpaw is this tree that is dying, but apparently this tree is a source of magic and a physical incarnation of Mother Earth.
Yeah, it's giving Axis Mundi, really.
Yeah. And so Pawpaw's dying. And they need they need Father, who later becomes known as Samson by the name of the goat, to go out and moidicate all the peoples and fill the land with blood, so that way Pawpaw can come back to life. The Pawpaw can come back to life. So he climbs on out that cave, and he goes and has a look around. Now, before all of that happens, there is the unfortunate aspect of where Abitha comes back to the cave and she realizes that Edward has probably fallen into the pit. And she goes off. She finds some people who are going to try and help her see if they can get him out. Unfortunately, they realize the pit's super deep and it feels real spooky.
And they can't retrieve the body, but they do see down in the cave, and they see that it's pretty much inaccessible to retrieve it, and it's also in a state of, I don't know how to describe it, like it's really graphic, the state of the corpse, Edward's corpse. And they kind of hold a really piss poor sort of funeral for him, and I think Abitha was kind of like upset that like his death wasn't recognized in a way that she felt like fitting, and she was really kind of haunted and grieving the loss of this man she was forcibly married to, but yet kind of had feelings for. And I think she kind of mentions that she ended up really liking Edward, and I don't think she was in love with him, but she did love him.
Yeah. And it's kind of made pretty clear that the people of Sutton, like, very few of them are like people any of us would really want to be friends with. Like, there's one really nice girl that Abitha is kind of friends with. They don't really mention her much towards the later half of the book. They mentioned her a little bit early on. I can't remember her name. But then most of the women in the town heavily dislike Abitha. But most of the people in the town are very like blasé or apathetic to most of the things that go on, unless someone is being accused of a crime and is in the stocks. Then they get real happy because these people are going around picking up handfuls of manure and throwing them at people. And I'm like, y'all's hands are nasty.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like at the beginning, there's this man who's in the stocks. And I guess he's a man who Abitha and Edward thought was nice because Abitha feels really bad for him. And he's cold, and she goes to put a blanket on him.
And that's a big no-no.
And it was a big no-no. People lost their shit. And I tell you what, I've never hated a group of women more than the women in this book.
They were terrible. Yeah.
They were vile, awful. Especially Miss Goody Williams. Fuck that bitch.
Period. So once Edward is dead, Wallace pretty much decides that he's just going to come and take over the property. And I think the magistrate, the reverend, and the minister, or the judge, the magistrate, and the minister, all kind of come to Abitha to like basically tell her that you're going to go live with Wallace.
I don't think the magistrate was there yet, but it was most of the clergy within Sutton and Wallace.
The minister I thought was there for sure, right?
Reverend Carter. Yeah, Reverend Carter was there.
I thought it was like basically the influential men of Sutton.
It was the influential men of Sutton. The magistrate is the guy towards the end of the book who Wallace keeps going and seeing throughout the book.
Yeah.
And he doesn't come until like there's some witch business going on.
Well, and basically Abitha was like, isn't it your puritanical law that because I'm a widow, I get to inherit the property? And basically she pulls out their own rule book and uses it against them. And, Wallace is completely irate at this idea that this woman is talking back, especially to these notable authoritative figures of their society, or just to men, period. And he's like, this is crazy nonsense, blah, blah, blah. It basically ends up having to go to almost like a trial. And they give Abitha this kind of shitty end of the deal where they allow her to attempt to pay the last payment. And in order to do so, she has to raise enough crop to sell to pay the rest of Edward's debt off to his brother, Wallace, and then she can have the property. But Abitha is like this young, sort of petite, frail woman on the edge of town near the wild, where, there's also some very problematic puritanical mindset towards the natives. Some, good old fashioned colonialism, if you will. So you can fill in the blanks.
They do refer to them as savages.
Yeah. And so they're like, there's no way that this young girl is going to be able to make it on the edge of the wilds. And also, how is she going to tend to the land herself? She's a woman. So they thought for sure that Abitha would fail and Wallace would get the property anyway. So when Wallace was freaking out because he was like, this is bullshit, blah, 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 give me my property. The notable men just kind of thought like, well, we're kind of helping you out here because we're giving her kind of a raw end of the deal, but she is technically right. She is a widow, so she technically does have a right to inherit the property.
Mm-hmm. And Abitha is described as being very small. And also, hi, Neon Cicada. Yes, we're talking about the book Slewfoot by Brom. So yes, it is a piece of fiction. But man, she is, and this is another reason why the people of Sutton don't like her, is because she's intelligent.
Very. And intuitive.
Mm-hmm. She's very intelligent. She's very intuitive. And no one likes that. No one likes a smart woman in this town. And funny enough, there are a couple of them. And I think that's what the problem, and a lot of those women aren't liked as much, except for one, which would be Sarah Carter, who is the wife of Reverend Carter. Who her story progression makes me sad.
Yeah.
But so basically Abitha convinces the clergy and the town officials that she can do this. Also, the ultimatum that they give her is not a long time. She basically has until the 1st of October to get these crops grown. And it's already like hitting early fall, I believe, when we start the book. And so she doesn't have a whole lot of time to get these crops together. So she goes back to her farm and she gets started. She's ready. She gets started. And the biggest issue that she struggles with at first is getting the plow attached to their donkey. But
yeah. And she starts to see that like she almost wants to give up and unalive herself because it's so hard and she can't believe how hard it actually is. And I think it was Creek who like tries to lure her into the well to like unalive herself.
Mm-hmm. She's standing in front of the well on their property and she's like, okay, I got to get some water. So she's trying to pull up the water and Creek severs the rope. And so she's like, fuck, that's my only bucket. And then she gets real hopeless and she's standing in front of this well. She's like, if I just fall in, then, I won't have to deal with this anymore. And bonus point, my decaying body will befoul the water so that it ruins the land for Wallace.
Mm-hmm.
And so
which was iconic.
Iconic. I mean, she's being petty and I'm here for it.
She's a girl in it for the people, really.
She really is. But she changes her mind.
She almost slips because she leans over the edge and she's like kind of almost flirting with the idea of it. And she like slips and then she like regrets the idea of like, oh wait, no, I really don't want to die. Like
right.
JK.
But she gets it together and she figures out a way to get the plow onto the donkey. We also find out, I think, at this point that she has a lovely little cat. His name is Booker. And Booker is a rescue because she saved him from being mauled by dogs. And he was scruffy and he had one eye and a bent tail. And I really loved Booker. Again, another character in the story that's progression made me sad.
Mm-hmm.
trigger warning, things don't go well for Booker. Um, and you basically get a really good glimpse at the life Abitha is trying to build for herself after Edward's passing and what she wants to do with this farm. And it's not that she doesn't have the knowledge or the ability to do it. It's just she's alone. She is one woman trying to work a large piece of land, trying to get crops to grow in a season that there has been no rain. That's the other thing that they touch on, is that part of the reason why so many crops are failing is because there has been no rain. But there are also other things that they have on the farm, like they have bees. Edward kept bees, so Abitha would frequently make honey brittle that she would give to people as candy. I think they had something else that they grew on the farm too.
I think that there were like wild foraged berries also.
Yeah, something like that. But she does struggle for a hot minute before she starts to get a handle on things. It's just getting that rain to come, which she prays for every day. Another thing that did not endear her to the people of Sutton is that while she is going through this arduous time, Reverend Carter has given her leave from church. And the reason that this is so bad is because not coming to church in Sutton is punishable, like, by law. Like, if you don't if you don't come to church, you might end up in the stocks, or you might end up getting some other kind of like martial punishment.
And I thought Reverend Carter was kind of trying to be empathetic towards her situation because, like, you know, she's got all this work ahead of her. She's by herself. She's on the edge of town. She's grieving. Mm-hmm. And so I think the Reverend was like genuinely trying to be compassionate. But the townsfolk like, you're giving her special treatment. And it's wicked that she's not coming to church. And when, blah.
Yeah. The Carters, specifically Reverend Carter and his wife Sarah, are both really good people in that they understand Abitha's situation. They're not necessarily like trying to coddle her, but they're like, take some time, get your shit together, and then come back to church. And their one thing was they were like, you need to study the Bible every day. Yeah. And you need to pray every day. And as long as you do that and you can show us that growth, then you can come back to church in this set amount of time and we'll be Gucci, you know?
And while all of this story is going on, there's also the story of Slewfoot, where he's kind of becoming more and more coming into his power and coming more and more into a sort of a story of like self-discovery for Slewfoot, because he's kind of in a way forgotten like who he really is. And so some funny things end up happening, like he scares one of the townsfolk to death. Like she has like cardiac arrest, and her son, who's like a toddler, I think is like all into him, like thought he was just like so cool. And then like the mother sees the son, and they were like out picking berries, and the mother sees the son with this big demon beast and totally freaks out and has a cardiac arrest.
Mm-hmm. And the scene was both funny and sad, because it's like the little kid was like, ooh, you're cool. And like Slewfoot is trying to like have a dialogue with the child to a certain degree. And then I think it was the child's grandmother, because this lady was old.
Yeah. And it kind of starts going through this narrative of like Slewfoot starts off as like this spectral sort of old god conjuration, then slowly becomes more physical, but is very like bestial and goat-like and primal and functioning on mostly like animal instincts. And he needs blood to empower himself and get stronger. And the wild folk are trying to empower him too. Mm-hmm. And then he kind of goes through this period of like wrath where he's just tearing shit up and just devouring, you know, he's really stepping into the title also as Slayer. He's father, he's Slayer. And then he kind of steps into his like King of the Wild, where he kind of shifts from the goat-like bestial form to like this antlered old god of the wild sort of form, and starts to remember that people used to worship him, leave him offerings, like sing praises to him in a in a time before times. And so he starts to remember that, like, I'm more than just this beast. Like, I'm a god of the land.
I will say we did get a little bit ahead of ourselves, because I think at this, because isn't it when the old lady has the cardiac arrest, isn't, because I feel like, okay, we are missing a part. So rewinding a little bit, when Miss Abitha is trying to figure out how to get this plow on her donkey, a couple things happen in this particular section, where Creek, Forest, and Sky — Forest is the possum, Creek is the fish, Sky is the crow, or raven — all decide that their first victim is going to be Miss Abitha because she's closest to the cave. This doesn't exactly work out very well, but then
They tried to basically bamboozle her and kill her in the barn.
Yeah, and it doesn't work.
And she ends up kind of connecting with Slewfoot, and there's this whole like ethereal moment between the two.
He touches Abitha, and some of his memory unlocks to a certain degree. We also get a first look at the real initial villain of this story, in that we start getting this imagery of spiders. And after this encounter with Abitha, Slewfoot is a little drained, shall we say. And he starts kind of like, they're back in the cave, and he starts reaching into the ether, the primal, something like that. And he starts calling ghosts.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's like, ooh, these ghosts feel nice. I'm going to go with the ghosts. And Forest and Creek and Sky are like, no, don't do that. You're going to get lost in the death.
And while this is going on too, Abitha keeps having visions of seeing her husband with like sunken, abysmal eyes and like the deep woods just staring and pointing at her and other things. Like, also not helping the fact that she's grieving the loss of her husband. She's seen like her husband's tormented spirit trying to tell her something.
Yeah, which is also kind of sweet in a way, because it's like Edward was trying to protect her even beyond the grave.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's what I took from it. But Slewfoot decides he's going to go with these ghosts and just kind of fuck off into the woods, and hang out with some ghosts for a while. And we get to encounter a couple different spirits, but we then become aware of this giant serpent within the earth. From Slewfoot's point of view, while he's just like, I can't remember what I'm doing and I'm tired. And then there's this pig spirit, and it's like, or this boar spirit, and it's like, yeah, stuff's hard. I'm gonna go to sleep. And then, but the problem is that everyone keeps forgetting what they're doing, and they're sitting in front of this pool of water. And at one point, Slewfoot's like, what is that? And the boar's like, oh, that's the Lethe River, which, if any of you know your Greek mythology, the river Lethe is the river of forgetfulness. So we kind of have this whole like story of like Slewfoot in his ethereal form trying to figure out who he is and what he's supposed to be doing and why he's doing these things. And then he like goes out and he's like, oh, there's wolves. I'm going to run around with these wolves. And he ends up munching on a couple.
Going on that wrath, that slayer, destroyer sort of archetype, fulfilling that.
And after he eats these hunters, that's when he encounters the child. And he's all like, grr. And the child's like, haha, you're cool. And then the grandmother comes back and she's like, the devil, and dies. And then the child is like, you killed my grandma, and runs away. And then Slewfoot is conflicted, because while he is the slayer, he felt some sort of compassion for the child. Like, he was like, oh, you liked me. And what this came from is the child was giving him adoration, which he was able to take in some power from. And then so he's like sitting there in the woods alone with a dead woman, and the child ran away, and he's like, well, fuck, I guess I'm going to go do something else. And he picks up the lady's basket, or the bucket. She had a bucket full of berries, and he eats some of the berries and wanders off into the woods. While this is going on, this is when the well stuff is happening with Abitha. So he's missing. the three wild folk are out of their fucking mind because they're like, where did he go? And so they decided to continue messing with Abitha.
And there's
So,
also this man, Ansel, in Sutton, who
oh
the town
God,
kind of views as like a crazy drunk, lunatic, kind
digging
of.
around in bushes looking for cats because they're of the devil.
Yeah, and he is convinced that the devil is in Sutton. And so he's like taking this incident of, the grandmother having this heart attack and the little boy screaming about a demon or a devil or something. He's taking this as like, see, this is a sign the devil really is here in Sutton. And um, I think Slewfoot takes the bucket of harvested berries
Mm-hmm.
and like leaves it for Abitha almost like an offering, which I feel like was kind of symbolic of like this whole making pacts with nature spirits kind of thing and being careful of the gifts that you receive. Um,
She woke up real confused because when she
yeah.
woke up, there were two buckets. Because Slewfoot came and he was like, why is she asleep on the ground? She had passed out. And he was like, what did you guys do talking to the wild folk? And this part is kind of inferred. It's not actually played out in the book. But you basically find out that father or Slewfoot was mad because they had messed with her. And so he has River fix the rope and bring the bucket back up. And so when Abitha wakes up, there's two buckets and one of them's full of berries. And she's like, I don't know how this got here, but I'm going to eat these berries. We're missing one other thing too before that. The dream that Abitha had about the tree. So
Oh, yeah.
Abitha, while she's knocked out by the well, because she passes out because she's hot and she's thirsty and she's out of her head with all the things that have been going on, she dreams of an apple tree that is not on their property, but she dreams of this apple tree. And it has all these big, beautiful, succulent apples on it. And she's hungry. She's real hungry. They don't have food. And she goes over to this apple tree, and in this tree, there is a snake. I think they describe it as a black snake with red eyes. And it's like, hey, girly, you want some apples?
Pop off, girl
You want
queen.
She's like, hey, honey, pussy boss, you want some apples? And so Abitha, in this dream, bites into one of the apples. Isn't the apple bloody?
Yeah.
Which is interesting because I feel like a lot of us witches have had this kind of vision before. I know I have. I can't speak for all witches, but I've had this. And then she's like, oh no, the devil, and wakes up. And then she wakes up and finds the two buckets, and she's like, why are there two buckets? But she's tired, and she's like, there's berries, and she just starts snarfling down berries, and then I think she goes to bed. After this, we start to have an uptick in her having dealings with Slewfoot. Basically, he starts like showing up, and he's like, hey.
I'm gonna put you on solo. I'll be right back. Okay. Just keep talking about the book.
Like Slewfoot keeps showing up, and he's like, hey, like, can we be friends? And she's like, no, fuck off. You creep me out. You're the devil. And slowly over time, they start to become closer. They start to become more friendly with each other. And as their relationship develops, they start to realize that there's more of a connection, especially when they're physically connected. When they are touching each other, they can tap into something deep and primal within the earth. And this leads to the first miraculous thing they do, which Abitha consistently is like, I need rain. I need rain because I need the crops to grow. And initially, Slewfoot's like, okay, yeah, rain's coming, it's coming, whatever. And because of Abitha not being into the idea of dealing with him, he kind of sulks off into the forest, and she goes after him with some of the candy that she makes. And she's like, here, have some candy. I'm sorry. And they end up getting into this discourse where Slewfoot realizes that when he is given offerings, it gives him power in a way. And he ends up making something grow. And he's like, oh shit, I can bring things to life. And Abitha's like, yep, you sure can. And he's like, we got to do the thing. Because he's super excited at this point. He's like, I can do stuff. So he snatches Abitha up by her weave and takes her back to the farm. And he's like, tell me what you want. Tell me what you want. And she's like, I want corn. And he's like, no, you have to meet it. And she's like, give me corn. And so they do this whole thing where she is exuding her desire and he's like feeling what she wants. And together they dig their hands into the earth and they make the corn grow. And they do
literally dick in the dirt.
Yeah.
Pussy to the earth. Like, yeah. And also, like, what Woodland Raven is talking about, I loved her sort of like connection that she had to the mothers, like her mother and her mother's mothers. It was really beautiful.
Oh, also, if you guys want us to just talk about something really bad in the future, we can tell you about a movie we watched recently. It was real bad.
So bad. Mother of Tears.
Mother of Tears was so bad, but it's witchy. Anyway.
And it's part of the Three Mothers trilogy, which we're trying to work on because I do want to eventually do something on the cosmology of the Three Mothers. But back to Slewfoot, have we talked about where the wild folk get like really upset that like Slewfoot is basically using this small reserve of energy that he has to help this girl Abitha, and so they decide to devise a plan to try to kill Abitha again. And I think it was Forrest who's like, I'm gonna put snakes in her bread bin, and
I'm gonna put snakes in her boot,
and poisonous spiders in her bed sheets, and I'm gonna hide in her house and jump out. And like Abitha, when she returns home from doing whatever she was doing, has like this intuitive moment and is like, something's not right in this household. And she like grabs this braid that has hair braided from her mother and her mother's mother and her mother's mother's mothers, the 12 mothers.
Her mama's mama's mama.
Abitha becomes like the 13th in this hair braid, which is giving 13 moons, if you will. It's iconic. And the 12 mothers to me were kind of representations of the 12, moons, with her being the 13th moon, and also the 12 zodiac. So, and basically her mother throughout the book really is constantly a beacon of hope and guidance for her. And so she uses the braid to determine, essentially kind of practicing some necromancy with her mom, that like, yes, girl, there is danger in here. And she basically commands Forrest to get up out of her home.
She's like, I need to remember how to do things. And she ends up, I don't know, I can't remember if you talked about this at the beginning of the book, but so when Abitha is going to collect this braid from her mother's like she shed where she does all of her stuff, her mother had a book of like recipes and everything like that. And her father like is like
grimoire, if you will.
Yeah, her when her father goes, the devil, and takes all of the stuff, he takes the book and burns it. Am I the only one who thought that this book was going to show up magically later on?
I kind of liked, though, the story of her connecting to the knowledge of the book via the Mighty Dead.
I loved that too. Don't get me wrong. But I was like, that book's going to come back. But anyway, she has this braid and she's like, Mom, I need to remember that thing you made that kept spirits away. And she ends up like making stuff out of ash and salt and all this other stuff. And she makes this powder and it burns the spirits. Now, was it crazy? No, but she knew how to keep them out of her house. Also, Forrest had a lot of trouble with calling anything because he was like, I'm going to call the things that are poisonous to get her. And then the things don't come. And he's like, why aren't my powers working? That's how I imagined Forrest was the whole time. Yeah, I agree, Haley. Forrest got on my nerves too. But there was something I loved about him because I love possums. And
my favorite wild folk was Creek. I just love the idea of this eldritch child fish surgeon beast horror floating in the air.
With needle sharp little teeth.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I loved them all. I had a soft spot for Forrest because I work with possum in Minecraft. If you ever want to hear about the dumpster fire hags, I'll talk about that at some point in the future. It's a a thing that a friend of mine created that I'm a part of now. But out of the wild folk, I think my favorite was probably Sky, just because Sky was always just kind of egging everybody on and just being a little bit of a shit. Like if someone was doing something, Sky was up there like, caca, ha 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 ha.
Yeah.
I liked Sky a lot. Yeah, Forrest was not always it. Forrest was kind of annoying sometimes. But
So,
I do feel like
so,
Forrest redeems himself.
and so Slewfoot, we're getting close to the hour mark here. So we're going to have to power through a little bit of like some more of this book because I want to also talk about what we thought of it in other ways too. But um, so essentially, Abitha ends up pacting with Slewfoot and getting the crops to come into fruition. And things start going really well for her. So well that the town starts getting a little suspicious, and she like starts coming back to church and she's got nice clothes and she looks well kempt and like she's making these payments and harvesting all of this, and it's just like the town is getting really suspicious um of her. And then
Also, she's glowing and beautiful, and everyone's like, "Sin, sinner."
yeah. Yeah. And I think the Reverend's daughter gets like really ill, and Abitha really wants to help. And so this is like very predictable, but basically she talks to her mother through the hair braid and kind of discovers this recipe to heal this particular illness that the Reverend's daughter has.
Pretty sure she had
And
measles.
yeah, and so she kind of has this internal battle of like, do I do cunning craft to go help the Reverend's daughter? That's kind of putting me in a shitty situation, but I feel like it's the right thing to do. And Abitha, being the character that she is, decides, fuck, the consequences. I'm going to do what I think is right. And so she goes over there. Reverend Carter and his wife are both like a little nervous about letting her do this, but she's like, oh, we'll just do it in the Lord's name. And she kind of does it to Slewfoot's name, sort of like under her breath, but like she masquerades the work to look like the work of a good Christian woman.
She's putting the craft in the witchcraft.
And honestly, I just thought that that was very true to how a lot of craft really is, and how a lot of craft has survived by being almost shielded by like sort of Christian wrapping paper. So I thought that that was like something that was very true to real world experiences. And so
Yeah.
the daughter gets healed, and when she leaves, Ansel is like, witch, witch. And
Um,
things start going downhill for her after that.
there is a problem with the whole helping. I can't remember what the daughter's name was.
I can't either.
When Abitha is doing the healing magic, unfortunately, the daughter has visions, dreams of Slewfoot. And of course, when she awakens, the first person she sees is Abitha. And then when she leaves, Ansel, of course, being the creepy old man that he is, he's outside. He's like, "What y'all doing? Y'all doing witchcraft in there? I feel like you're doing witchcraft in there." And Abitha's like, "You're old and smell weird. Leave me alone."
She's like, you smell like liquor. Like,
she's like, "You smell like Cheetos and liquor. Go away." And then she trots off back home. Eventually, she does rename Slewfoot, because Slewfoot is something she occasionally calls him. She does eventually rename him Samson, because she was like, "Well, you ate my goat, so like,
and
I
my
guess I'll name you."
husband.
She's like, "I guess I'll name you Samson."
Well, she also kind of has like an internal struggle with this whole like she's making friends with this old god nature spirit who's helping her, and she's reaping great rewards from it. But at the same time, she's grieving the loss of her husband. And what killed her husband is also what's currently presently helping her. So she's like real conflicted about this whole bit.
And the thing that really kind of cemented the whole thing, where she was like, "Okay, maybe you're a forest god," because my mom used to talk about those things. So maybe that's what you are. And then the real part of it was her way of getting over Edward, is she found out that it was Forrest's fault. Because again, Forrest is a little fucker, causing all kinds of problems. And so she was like, "So this is your fault, you little possum bitch." And she's like, okay, you ate my husband, Samson, but I forgive you because you did not know what you were doing. So you and me, we can be besties.
Yeah, and Samson also kind of shows some like genuine human remorse for it affecting her so negatively too. Like he starts to really care for her.
And it always be Forrest, don't it, Crafton? It always be Forrest. The relationship that is developed between Samson and Abitha is really sweet. It's not like a lover's kind of relationship at all. It's very much like, and I wouldn't even necessarily say it's like a father-daughter kind of relationship. It's like,
It's just really something else totally entirely different because
it is.
I did feel some undercurrents of like love, but I wouldn't necessarily equate it to the sexual or romantic love that most people are, thinking of. But there was love between them
It,
there, and there was passion, and there was ecstasy, and there was desire,
yeah.
because that's kind of what fueled magic. Also, Samson takes her flying. Um,
That whole sequence was iconic.
yeah. Um, so I mean, to kind of skip ahead here a little bit for sake of time, basically she gets accused of witchcraft at one point in the book, and the men come to her house and like they're trying to charge her for witchcraft. And while this is going on, like we start kind of getting to know more of this real kind of villain behind the scenes that's associated with the spiders, Mamonopet.
Ooh. Um,
He's like kind of this wicked shaman guy.
so as we progress through the book, what we learn about Mamonopet is that he is this ancient demon that came over from the ice, and basically the people came from the north from the ice, and they came down, and this is where we get the indigenous tribe that we hear a lot about in the book. And for a long time, long time, Mamonopet has acted as a shaman for the people of this village. Um,
This is Mamonopet here. This is Slewfoot here.
there's a real good like spooky fight scene between the two of them, but we'll get there. Um, but basically, Mamonopet is this being that Forest and Creek and Sky kind of have conversations about when Father isn't around, because they're like, if he keeps fucking with this magic and keeps messing with little Miss Abitha, he's gonna draw the attention of Mamonopet. And also some other things that Pequot, that's the name of the tribe, the Pequot. At one point in the story, we have to deal with Wallace consistently through this book, and
Constantly trying to sabotage Abitha's every move.
so he comes to visit Abitha at one point. He's like, he's like on the way, and he's like, haha, there ain't no way that Abitha got that corn for me. I'm gonna go and gloat about it. Gets to the farm. Farm is lush with corn. She has barrels like boxes and boxes of corn ready for his
And
end.
didn't he like hire some he like went into like this merchant area, and there were like some native merchants, and he offered them money and like hired them because he basically wanted to try to burn all of her crops.
So after he sees the corn, he's like, oh, we can't have that. I'm not featuring that. So he goes and he hires some Pequot men to go back with him. And also, how racist is this? This Wallace asshole puts on indigenous blackface basically so that he can blend in with them. And the way that he does it is he like has like a dirty mop on his head that has been dyed like a dark color, and he's like put on like he's like smeared mud on his face so that he has darker skin. Truly disgusting. And they go and they try to burn the barn where all of this corn is, and they kind of succeed, but Abitha gets to get some of hers in because she shoots two of the Pequot men, and she shoots Wallace in the leg. Wallace unfortunately gets away, and he is fully planning to be like, haha, well, she ain't got no corn no more, because he basically burns it all. He does succeed in burning all the corn.
Which is devastating at that part in the book because you're just like, oh, like you've been rooting for Abitha this whole time as the underdog, and this horrible thing happens. And then basically right after, not too long after that, is when she gets tried for witchcraft. And the book starts, that part of the book kind of starts.
Well, the problem is that she's devastated and she doesn't know how anything's gonna happen. Samson's like, okay, we can figure this out. It's okay. We can't make the corn grow, but we'll figure something out. And
I do want to say too, I think that it resonated with me a lot with the way that they kind of wove magic, because it was this connection to Mother Earth, and it was like working with Samson through ecstasy and passion and desire and connection, but really the magic was coming from the earth, and they were almost kind of like conduits of the great goddess, really.
yeah. So ultimately what ends up happening is Abitha's like, wait, bees. I have bees. Can I do stuff with the bees? And
Love this scene.
Samson's like, yeah, we can do stuff with the bees. I need you to hum. And she's like, hum? And he's like, hum. So she starts humming, and he's like doing his devil thing, and she's doing her witch thing, humming and singing. And he's like,
she's put on a show.
And he's like got his DJ headphones on, and he's like doing the, and then the bees start producing piles and piles and piles of honeycomb.
Period.
Because honey sells higher than corn.
It's corn.
And so when the dudes come back so it's like the sheriff, the reverend, Wallace, all like some deputies. Wallace is like talked this up too. He's like, she's insane. Who knows what she's done? She's out there probably being wild. She's being wild.
Being wild.
Wild. And then they get out there and they're like on the road to it, and then they see these graves by the roadside. And they're like, oh my God, who died? And they keep going, and they get to the farm, and they see that the barn is like half burned, and they're like, oh my God, she set the barn on fire. And then they're like the Reverend Carter's like knocking at the door. And he's like, Abitha, are you decent, honey? Honey, can I come in, girl? Because Reverend Carter, he's not a bad guy. And then Abitha's behind him, and she's like, sup? And they all freak out, and the deputy has a gun, and he's like pointing it at her, and she's like, I'm an unarmed woman. What are you doing?
She's like, the fuck?
She's like, the fuck? And so the sheriff, who also, in my opinion, was not a super bad guy. The sheriff is like, calm your ass down, deputy. I regret giving you this gun. And they're like, well, sorry, Abitha. You have to be Wallace's slave now because blah, blah, blah. You didn't have the corn. And Wallace is just sitting over there like, yeah, you're going to be my slave. And she's like, well, actually, no, I'm not. And she reaches into her pocket, pulls out a big bag of wampum, because they don't have money. They use wampum, which is beads that are formed from ground shells. And that's what they use as currency. And she's got this bag, and she's like, that should be most of the payment right there. And they're like, where'd you get this money, girl? And she's like, well, I have a bunch of honey because Edward, my late husband, keeps bees. And she's like, I went to...
And then she tongue popped.
She said... And then she pulls out a receipt, and she's like, this is from the shop in this town. And I sold this much honey to this man. And I had him write down the going price of honey for all over the place. And she said, this is what it is. And then she takes them inside the cabin, inside her cabin. And there's more honey in there. She's got like several pounds of honey. And she takes them in there.
Same, like, by the way.
Same for sure. She goes inside, and she's like, and this will be the rest of the payment. And they're like, well, how do we know what this is worth? And she's like, I'm glad you asked. And she pulls out another thing, and she's like, this is how much this honey is, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, well, fuck. Okay, Wallace, guess she paid you off. And he's not having it. He's like, you a witch. This is witchcraft. And the sheriff and Reverend Carter are like, Wallace, you're being a bitch.
Literally.
So they're like, take your honey and shut the fuck up and go.
and be on your way. So.
And so they leave, and Miss Abitha's like, yay, we did it. And then, you know, she's celebrating everything like that for now.
I think meanwhile, this is where Slewfoot and Mamonopet, like there's that whole bit, right?
We're almost there. So basically what happens is Slewfoot's still trying to figure out what's going on with his memory, because he can't remember exactly who he is. He's getting little flashes, and one of the memories that unlocks while he's doing magic with Abitha is he has this memory of the Pequot people, and like he remembers them worshiping him, and then he remembers fire and bloodshed, and he sees a silhouette of himself breaking in two. So Abitha is good with the honey. He goes off, or she's good with the honey, and then at some point, while he's like hanging around the farm, he looks off towards the trees and sees two Pequot men, and he goes off a chasing them, and he follows them back to the Pequot village, and he's not trying to hide nothing, because something that they talk about is that these spirits, Samson or Slewfoot included, can decide if they want people to see them. And he's not even caring about that. He's like, these people gonna see me. They're gonna see me today. So he's just going through the village, and he's following this sensation. He's following this sound. He hears the drumming of the shaman. And he enters and he goes through the village, and he climbs up this cliff, and up on the cliff, he sees the shaman doing shaman things. And he's like, you can answer my questions, can't you? And he climbs up, and the shaman's not there anymore. He's inside a cave. And he follows the shaman inside this cave. And in this cave is Mamonopet, who is surrounded on all sides by masks. And so
it's getting unsettling.
Yeah, so him and Slewfoot are just having a dialogue. Him and Samson having a dialogue.
A kiki.
And he's like, so Mr. Slewfoot, or he doesn't call him that. They call him, I had this name in my head at the beginning of this video, and now I can't remember it. Basically, it means like Deathbringer or something like that.
Mamonopet kind of tries to insinuate the fact. Yeah, and insinuate that Slewfoot is this terrible bestial destroyer of everything good and holy, and if you really care about Abitha and the people kind of thing, then you will...
Habamok, that's what they call him.
Yeah.
They call him the Habamok. And he's like, if you want to know the truth, go look at that. And there's a mask or a skull. And he's like, if you go look into that, you'll see everything you need to know. And also the whole time, Mamonopet is talking up the wild folk. He's like, yeah, those wild folk, those fairies, those spirits, those aren't good things. Those are demons. Those are demons that changed you from what you truly were into an evil, destructive monster. And so Samson's like, I'm confused, but I'm going to go look in this thing over here. And so he goes and looks in the skull and doesn't realize it until after it happens, but he gets sucked inside the skull, basically. And it's showing him all these visions about how he used to be worshipped by the Pequot people, but he turned on them because he listened to the demons that are the wild folk, and he started killing them and blah, blah, blah. And Mamonopet's like, I can put you to sleep, girl, and then you won't hurt nobody never again. And Slewfoot's like, okay, I guess that's probably what needs to happen. And this is where we start to understand the spiders a little bit more, because the spiders are a magical tool of Mamonopet. Mm-hmm. And so Samson starts having these spiders at the edges of his vision, and they all creep in, and then he's covered in these black spiders, and he's like, yes, sleep. While poor Samson is asleep and stuck in a skull, this fucker Wallace comes back to the farm with his son and Ansel, who he has recruited, and is like, okay, we're going to sit up on this hill and we're going to watch her.
And we're going to prove that she really is the Witch of the Wood.
A witch.
A witch.
And so they're watching her, and they're like, oh, she has a cat. It's a familiar.
She's walking
Still.
around outside with her hair undone and loose and just being sexy.
Mm-hmm.
She's attractive. She's put a spell on me.
They're like up in the trees, like getting boners, and they're like, witch. And then they see her making a wreath, and they're like, oh, witch crown. And so they go down there. Wallace is overcome with rage, and he goes down there, and he basically whoops her ass. Like he like like the description in the book is pretty visceral. Like he basically like throws her around, like grabs her by her hair, throws her.
Like a rag doll.
Yeah, he ends up breaking her leg. Like he's like kicking her, and she's like trying to get away from him. And at one point, this is where unfortunately Miss Abitha makes a mistake, because she digs her fingers into the earth and starts humming and calls the bees. But she doesn't call the bees to attack all three of the men. She calls them to attack Wallace, just Wallace. While this is going on,
And they
Ansel
swarm him.
Yeah, while this is going on, Ansel grabs the wreaths that she was making, and they all book it. Like the bees start happening, and they're like, fuck this, and they leave. So they go back to town. Wallace looking a hot mess, and they're like, she's a witch. Look what she did to me. She summoned her bees. And
she made a wreath. Look.
And then they're showing everybody this witch crown. And they're like, look, it has animal bones and other stuff in it. It had her hair. It was like flowers, animal bones, and hair, which iconic.
We love to see it. Support your local artists, y'all.
Right. And then Crafton says, witches just be minding their business. And then whoosh, muggles attack. True. And then that fucking bitch, that Miss Goody got something to say every time. That bitch Miss Goody and the other bitches of town, they're like, oh, the charms that she gave us, they do burn us so. Oh, they are truly of the devil. Oh my, she's such a witch.
And all these heifers that she peddled her charms to, that they bought, and they were all into, because the charms were working. The charms were, in fact, charming. She even got so-and-so together. She was playing lovemaker, matchmaker, making them a wish. And all these girls basically came out and ratted on her and were like, yeah, she was doing spells on me, and I'm so offended and I'm so scared. And also the Reverend's daughter was like, when she healed me, I had visions of the devil. And that kind of like the last.
Yeah, I agree, Craft. Miss Goody need to get got, and she do get got at the end of the
and
book.
She got got.
She do get got. But they were also like, yes, Abitha, she did come to us in the night. She did whisper horrible secrets into our ears and caused us to become bewitched. And that's why we bought her charms. We didn't do it of our own volition. We're good Christian women.
And I think Wallace's daughter, like her father, Wallace's daughter was kind of one of the main young women who were like really stirring the pot on this and like kind of raising a cone of power of gossip, if you will.
Yeah, Helen, that was her name. See, Helen at the beginning of the book, I was like, oh, Helen's nice. We like
And then
Helen.
She betrayed her.
And then she participated in the fuckery. Don't trust no one named Helen. They got Helen their name, but it's not for the right reasons. And don't trust anyone named Goody. If I ever met someone named Goody in the modern era, I'd be like, I don't trust you.
I thought Goody was more of like a title or like a surname than like a name.
No, Goody's a name.
I thought good wife. I thought Goody was like good wife. I don't know.
Miss Goody. Miss Good. What's good, Miss Goody?
So basically, also Reverend Carter's wife, Sarah Carter, ends up getting kind of thrown into the mix because she allowed her daughter to be healed by Abitha. And so she must be pacting with the devil as well. And they both end up getting put on trial for witchcraft, and they're both essentially found guilty. And there's a bunch of terrible things that happen. Like they literally throw these women in cages. So trigger warning there. It gets real violent. It gets real graphic. There's also kind of like an SA situation that happens to Sarah Carter. And they go in pretty explicit detail about the man's dirty fingers. entering her. So
Basically,
that,
this is during the interrogation process. I don't really want to go too deep into that because it is very, very
and the
graphic.
cat gets thrown in.
Yeah, so basically what happens is the town goes in, so this is why I say the sheriff isn't a bad guy necessarily. The sheriff and his deputies go to get Abitha, and the sheriff, she's already aware. She's like, they're coming. She's trying to stock up a cart. She's getting ready to go, but she hears them coming. She's like, okay, I can't get away. I have a broken leg. This is it. So she gets her musket and she's waiting. And the sheriff shows up and he's like, Abitha, we have to take you away now. I would like this to go peacefully because I don't want this to go badly for you. And she's like, you stay the fuck away from me. And he's like, Abitha, please. And she ends up shooting her musket at him. She doesn't kill him. She just nicks his ear. But the deputies take it upon themselves to assault Abitha in this moment after she's already had the shit kicked out of her. They beat her up further. And the sheriff is like, stop hitting her.
Yeah, it
Like,
gets really violent. This book has a lot of heavy tones of racism, misogyny, like unaliving, SA. Like there's some heavy, heavy, heavy tones to this book.
there are. So they collect Abitha and take her to the town.
And her cat.
And well, not yes, someone goes back and gets the cat. So they take her and
They use it, I think, against her in the trial because they claim that it's her familiar because it's
yes.
all bent and hobbled and mangled looking.
But the sheriff takes her back to his house and she gets locked in his cellar because that's what they don't have a jail, so he uses his cellar. And the next day he wakes her up, he gives her a biscuit and something to drink, and he's like, I'm sorry that this is happening. I want this to be as gentle on you as possible, but this is not going to go well. I just need you to know that. And she's like, okay. So he takes her to the church, which is where they're having the court. She sits
Whole
there.
time Sammy's in the skull.
Yeah, Samson is still asleep. Samson has no idea any of this is going on. So they take Abitha to the church, and the magistrate shows up, and he's just this short, little, fat, pompous motherfucker. He's like, bring my chair. And they bring in some big old opulent chair, and then the trial starts. And they use all this shit against Abitha because, of course, she doesn't get to have a say in anything. And anytime she does speak up for herself, they're just like, shut up, woman. And so there's not a whole lot she can do. And then they bring in Booker. And they have Booker in a cage, and they're like, look at the ugly cat. It's obviously a devil. And everyone's like, oh no, he looked at me with his vile eye. The fucking goody again. She's like, oh, the cat did look at me. My skin does burn. Ah. And so they take the cat out, and he's upset. Booker's upset, and I hate this part. So they also question Sarah during this. And thank you, Crafton. They question Sarah during this, and Sarah's like, I didn't do shit. Like, Abitha came and helped my daughter. I'm a good Christian woman. I didn't aid and abet a witch. Y'all are crazy. And just a reminder, Sarah is the wife of the reverend, the head reverend, who the head reverend was excluded from the trial and basically made to sit out because even though he's the head reverend, they believed that he had something to do with this. So they pick one of the other reverends and they're like, hey, you, Reverend such and such no name, you get to be a part of this. And Reverend Connor is like, the fuck? This is my church. This is my town. And they're like, no, you can't sit with us. So unfortunately, because Sarah won't confess that Abitha's a witch, they wheel both Abitha and Sarah out. And they don't put them in cages. No, they don't tie them up. No, they do far worse. They put Abitha and Sarah into shittily put together slatted boxes that a normal person wouldn't be able to fit into. And while they're on the way to the boxes, they see that Abitha's cat Booker has been hung, basically. They hung Booker.
And keep in mind, Abitha's leg is also broken. So when they forcibly jam her in, it goes in detail about that too. But yeah, I mean, basically these women get tortured. It gets very graphic. Abitha kind of cries out for Sammy. Sammy's like nowhere to be found. And eventually, you know, Samson is able to break out of the mask. He comes to
Thanks
like
to
her
Forrest.
call.
Thanks
Yeah.
to Forrest.
And he comes to her call and he basically offers Abitha to drink from his blood. And he's like, I can free you of this. You can, like, if you drink my blood, but there's no going back. And so she ends up drinking from the blood. She becomes like a Slewfoot herself. And she and Samson kind of go on this killing rampage on the town.
It
My
was
personal
so satisfying.
my personal favorite part was she snatched up Wallace's daughter and carved an L into her forehead. And it's like, now everyone will know you're a fucking liar.
Like the whole scene where she and Samson are just murdering people is so satisfying. Because these people deserve it. The sheriff, aware that this is happening, because people because they're aware that, like, okay, something's happening. Also, when Samson breaks out, him and Mamonopet have a fight. There's a fight scene, and you get to see Mamonopet in his true form, basically. He turns into, like, this big man spider thing. And eventually is overcome. And that's when Samson comes back to save Abitha. So Abitha goes and she kills a bunch of people. This is also the unfortunate part where Sarah sees Abitha in this form and she's like, so you are a witch. And also Sarah, unfortunately, is kind of crazy at this point because of the interrogation she went through. And during her interrogation, if you're familiar with witch confession techniques, they attempted to press her. So she has broken ribs and she's very traumatized and everything like that. And she sees Abitha and she's like, you are the devil. I should have fucking ratted you out, but I stood up for you and you betrayed me. And then and basically Abitha leaves her in the woods cackling madly. And on the way back to town, because this is outside of town, they're on their way back to town, and Abitha sees fucking, not Wallace, because Wallace is dead at this point. His death was very satisfying. But Abitha sees Ansel. And she's like, ooh, I'm going to get that ass. I'm going to fuck him up. And so she's chasing Ansel down. And unfortunately, they get close to the church where all the people of the town have barricaded them into, and they have people with guns and everything like that. And they start shooting her and everything like that. And unfortunately, Abitha gets taken down at this point because she is not, in fact, immortal. And all the while, like, Samson is there. He's kind of like about, but he's lagging behind because earlier in this sequence, he gets shot in the leg. So he's not as fast as she is. Something that's interesting about this is after Abitha is taken in his blood, can you get a picture of her real quick after she's taken the blood? Abitha has developed goat legs. Like her legs turn digitigrade and she gets hooves and stuff like that. She has horns. She has claws on the ends of on her fingers instead of nails. She has little horns. She becomes bestial. And so at this point, she's laying dying from the gunshot wounds, and someone comes and picks her up, and it is Reverend Carter, who at this point had been in the stocks. Someone let him out of the stocks. I think it was Abitha who let him out of the stocks. Actually, after she gets transformed, she lets him out, and she's like, "Go. I don't want to hurt you. You had love for me." And he's like, "So were you the witch the whole time?" And she's like, "No, but you guys made me the witch." And so he goes and picks her up and takes her off a bit of ways. And basically Samson's like, he's like, I'm pissed off. I need you to take care of her body while I go handle these folk. So the people in the church are freaking out. And this is when Miss Goody gets it, because Samson steps out and everyone's freaking out. They're like, it's the devil. And they're all shooting and there's smoke and stuff in the air and people can't see what's going on. People are panicking. Someone's rifle misfires and shoots Miss Goody in the chest. She gets her tits blown off and her chest.
And we were all very happy to see it.
And it's like, I think the section of the book is like, she sits down hard and stares at the gaping wound in her chest. And I'm like, as you should. Period. Bye, Goody.
Period.
And then what essentially ends up happening is Slewfoot tricks them to the point that they have no idea where he is. And he sets the church on fire and they all die inside of it, burned alive. Yeah. Ironic.
Iconic. And then in the epilogue, like it's like years later, right?
Well, before we get to that, one more thing. So Ansel is still alive at this point. Samson grabs snatches Ansel up by his weave and says, "You're coming with me." They take Abitha and Ansel and Reverend Carter back to the hole where Pawpaw is. And they're like, "We need to do something, blah, 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 blah." Samson sacrifices Ansel. Pawpaw comes back to life, blossoms with fruit. Samson takes the fruit, squeezes it into Abitha's mouth, and she comes back to life. Yay!
And Ansel was kind of the sacrifice there, right?
Yeah, they
And
sacrificed
it was great.
And now the epilogue.
Yeah, and we kind of need to get through the rest of this because I want to make commentary about the book. But you guys check the book out. That's kind of our quick run through. And by quick, I mean we've spent an hour and a half just
And we
telling you
could
the book,
easily spend
basically.
longer talking about this. This book is so good.
Easily. But in the epilogue, basically there's these like hunters years later. They end up finding like this hut in the woods, and there's Abitha, and like they're totally enchanted by her. And she's like, and the devil's going to meet us for dinner.
And she's like, "Go to sleep, boys. I'll wake you up for dinner." And like, as one of the dudes is falling asleep, they see that she's got goat legs and horns, and she's surrounded by fairies and spirits.
It's such an iconic scene.
It's so good. It's so good. I know we kind of rushed there at the end, but like the end has some of the juiciest bits.
And you're just going to have to get the book. You're just going to have to buy Brahms' book and read it.
Like, I love that because I've been looking at this in the chat. Like, so many of you have already said, "I put my order in. I'm going to put my order." Get it. It's such a
Also, I do want to say that Daughters of Qayin is not sponsored in any way. If you want to sponsor us, though, hit us up. But we just genuinely liked Brahms' book. So this is not a sponsored message. I would really love to hear what y'all think of this book. Australia, when it comes to like real magic in our world and the magic in the book, what did you think of some of like the symbolic connections there? Like what resonated with you on a magical level? As you know, I think some of the criticism about this book is mostly coming from people who aren't practicing witches. And I feel like people who practice a more traditional form of witchcraft would really like this book.
I can honestly say there was a lot that I resonated with as a witch in this book. I've mentioned this idly before. And again, if this is something you guys ever want to hear about, I will happily talk about it. Jasmine's been bullying me to start my own YouTube channel, so maybe I'll make a video
for years at this point
about my experience with the witch's devil. The part where he offered his blood to her was very, very real to me because of my experience with the devil. Now, do I wish I could go outside, dig my fingers in the dirt, and summon bees? Yes, but that's maybe not something in my wheelhouse currently. But there were aspects of the magic, of the interaction with spirits, and just the feeling of the book, and especially their broom ride, their flight. That
I really like Woodland's comment here. I feel like this book can definitely be one of those things where fiction informs modern lore and can be a real practice.
Yes. The scene where they go on their flight, which we didn't really talk about, and I don't think we should because I want that part to be something that you guys get to experience when you read the book.
Same with some of the ending too.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want us to give everything, all of Brahms' work away. I want you guys to read this book yourself and uncover its mysteries.
The part about the flight really had a deep effect on me. And I think Woodland put it best. I mean, it's a piece of fiction that can really be informative to one's practice. Also, I will say this. I actually use humming a lot in my magic, humming and singing and dance. So all of that felt very appropriate.
And I really liked the representation of witch's devil, because kind of like in the summary of the book, whether you view Slewfoot as an old god of the wild or a demon, it's kind of like your perspective, because he is kind of like chthonic and infernal, but also like that green aspect of like life giver, fertility, virility. Like it's just a really rich like dynamic. And I think even amongst other witches, right? Because there's like other witches out there who are like, well, we witches don't believe in the devil. Some of us do, yes, actually. Like maybe you don't believe in the devil, but like, okay. Or like, you know, yeah, witches don't believe in the devil or whatever. Like I just, and even other witches, like having conversations about the witch's devil can be kind of controversial.
Yeah, it really can be. Also, I wasn't laughing at you, I was laughing at Blood's comment. um,
I have a bit of a conspiracy, which we talked about earlier. So I think, based on Brahms' book, you can interpret this as you will. But per the illustration and per the book, I mean, I'm interpreting her becoming wild from Samson's blood in a very literal sense, where even in the epilogue, the men see her horns and her hooves. And so she kind of like became like a Slewfoot almost herself. And then the fact that like, you know, she's talking about Samson almost like they are living together or like he's coming to dinner. Maybe it was just a ritual rite that she was doing as a witch, or maybe, she's become one with the wild because she kind of turned into this similar sort of beast that like Slewfoot is, which then takes you down like this conspiracy rabbit hole of like, what if Slewfoot was made too? Because like if Slewfoot is making other Slewfoots, I don't know, it's kind of giving vampire. It's kind of giving like
I will
fantasy
say
creature.
I didn't take that direction, but I see where you could get that direction. Um, I keep laughing because so many things about this are funny, especially with the dialogue that you and I have in private. It's just like Abitha's being wild.
She's being wild.
um, I took it more as Abitha's manifestation of these bestial qualities was a direct representation of her taking the devil into herself. And this was the manifestation of her truly as the witch. It was about her taking in that wild primal energy and that expressing itself upon her outwardly. Um, that's how I took it. But I think however you take it is valid.
Yeah. And I think that everyone will have their own journey with this book. And like I said, you should definitely check it out. I think that especially if you're interested in traditional witchcraft or like even folk horror, um, it's a really good read. Um, the art is wonderful, and I just loved the whole bit, really. Um, I think in the last 20 minutes, we should just kind of open it up for maybe if you guys have any questions. I know that we did get 2 questions before the stream started today, so I want to touch on that really quick. I got a question from one of the viewers talking about the wild hunt, which Astradia and I talked about this before we started streaming, and we both just would feel more comfortable maybe doing a whole episode on the wild hunt, which we're loosely intending for that to be around Beltane. So you can, featuring an episode around Mayday Beltane about the wild hunt. I think we should just do a whole episode on it. I agree with you, Australia. I think it's a big topic. And then the other one was the blood knife, the shelg question.
Which Blood had asked about, right?
Yeah.
So, I have some practical experience with this particular tool, Blood. So, in this particular tradition, there are 3 knives, and one of the knives is the red knife, which is the shelg. This is supposed to be a sacrificial knife or a bloodletting knife. But because we are health conscious in this world, there are technically 2 shelgs that you can have. One is what I referred to as the practical shelg, which for me, when I would use it, was a diabetic pen and lancets. So you use that to do the bloodletting because sterile, you're not going to get any kind of infection. You throw away the needle when you're done. And then there's the ceremonial shelg, which can look like a knife, a dagger, whatever you think you want it to look like. When I was trying to find one for myself, I definitely wanted to find one that had a red handle. Weirdly hard to find daggers and knives with red handles that work for what I wanted it to work for. But this
And you kind of consecrate the blood with the shelg. Like you
yeah.
wave it over the wound to create it as, or to consecrate it as like a ritual sacrifice.
Yep.
And you also use the shelg in the huzel and the red meal, right?
You can, yeah. It's used for the symbolism of sacrifice or the symbolism of bloodletting. So the pronunciation of the word is shelg. It is the shelg. It is the red knife or the red blade. It is the sacrificial knife, the shelg.
And if anyone has any questions for us before we wrap this up, please feel free to leave them down below. We've got, let's say, 17 more minutes or so.
Do we have any questions? You guys are talking.
I will say in terms of this here, for entertainment purposes, allegedly, only, there are many things I do that maybe aren't necessarily what you should do by the books. But I will say that ritual use of doing something like this on yourself or other consenting parties is something that needs to be navigated in like a sanitary way. But I do believe there is actually ways to do something similar to this that's more than just pricking your finger if you want to have the ceremonial, you know.
I can't tell you how viscerally angry I get every time I see some magic movie or show and they're like, we need blood for this spell, and they're always like slicing their hand open. I'm like, why are you,
Why the hand?
Yeah, like you're gonna need that hand.
And they like rip it open too.
Yeah.
And remember, it's across the street, not down. So
I would say we could probably have a discussion about proper bloodletting and magic, but I don't know if this is the time or the place for that.
yeah, I don't even know if like we can even really get super into that topic publicly on YouTube. That might even have to just be like an exclusive on Patreon or something.
I love what Jay said. This isn't Norwegian black metal, it's witchcraft. Why not
Right.
both?
Oh, also, we have another stream, you guys, coming up, I think February 15th. And we're going to be talking about satanic crime. So tune in for that. I also am going to be hosting a Black Wednesday, which is going to be our witches Lent, basically. I'm going to be hosting that here on my channel. I plan to have Beanbag Hagwag on, and we're just going to kind of have like a casual kiki and talk about this Black Wednesday, this witches Lent. It'll be 40 days. So if you're enjoying the 28-day witchy challenge that I put out, which I'm loving all of the content that you guys are making about it, I still have to make mine for today. But seeing other people doing this is really helping me stay accountable to do the project. But yeah, so the Witches Lent will be another online activity that if you want to participate in, stay tuned for the info on that. And then we're going to do another one. I think March 12th is the date that we picked, right?
Yes.
Which I know that at some point, I might have to double check some of these dates also with the Coven, because I think we're also taking a trip, and then I know that we have our Ostara, so I might have to double check some of these dates. But that's what's loosely on the calendar.
Also, I just want to say for your Witches Lent, the Black Wednesday thing, if you don't style your hair like Wednesday from the Addams Family, I will riot.
Oh, like the braids.
Yes, I will riot. Join me, people in the chat.
I was kind of thinking of doing like my like messy hair braid Victorian moment.
I want Wednesday Addams hair for the Black Wednesday stream.
Okay. I'll see what I can do. We'll do some braided pigtails or something.
I'll settle for that. We did have, I think we had a couple questions come up. Did you want to? Thank you, Jay.
I didn't see them.
So Dark Moon Mage says, have either of you played the Diablo games? I think Brahm maybe did some of the art for the new game with Lilith as the main character. I don't know if Brahm did. I have played all of the Diablo games, and I have already pre-ordered Diablo 4 because I am a gaming nerd.
I have played some of the Diablo games as well, and actually, my Lilith tattoo that's on my leg is kind of a fusion between Babylon and Lilith. But the version of Lilith is like that draconian infernal Lilith that's featured in the artwork of Diablo. So that's like in the works as part of my leg sleeve.
Which I love a humanoid Lilith, but something about that very draconian,
Me
like
too.
demony, like over fantasized type of like legend Lilith. Like I just love it.
And I have her also kind of depicted as like an infernal Mary with like the veil and
It's
her
really
sacred
cool. I
heart.
believe she has pictures of it on her social media. You should go look at it. It's super cool.
Oh, while we're here too, the Witches Ball, you guys. The Witches Ball, September 30th. That's going to be at Grand in New Albany, Indiana. It's the Midwest Witches Masquerade Ball. I'm going to be there.
I'll be there
Stradia
too.
plans to be there. Y'all should come out. We could have a little meet and greet moment or something.
The theme this year is supposed to be the tarot. Presently, I am planning to go as a depiction of the Star card.
And I will be the devil herself.
Although, wouldn't it be iconic if I did something like Temperance so we could have an angel devil moment?
You know what I mean?
You know what I mean?
You know what I mean? Giving Eve, giving Lilith.
I'm not going to Vogue. I can't do it. Kitty cat, meow meow.
These would be fun in an MP3 format.
Just so people can listen to us. Be crazy. Just so you guys can listen to us be wild whenever you
We're
want.
being wild.
Being wild.
Mikey, I really wish you could come to. Just get on a plane. You're not that far. You're only on the other side of the country. No big deal.
Mikey, do we need to come kidnap you and like stick you in some luggage and bring you with us to the Witches Ball?
But also check out Mikey's channel, you guys, the monastery.
Yeah. Go check out his channel. He has really he doesn't have many videos yet, but he's working on it and they're really good.
And Mikey's doing the challenge too.
He is.
And Mikey also wrote this amazing short story, which later I'll have to share this with you, and sent me and Crafton some gifts. I'll tell you about it when we get off air. So to clarify too, there's a couple different witches masquerades. The Midwest Witches Ball is not affiliated with the New Orleans or the Salem Ball. It's like totally our own Midwest thing. And this is the second year that they're doing it. And it was so popular because we don't have anything like this in the Midwest. And there is so much magic and witches in the Midwest. It was so popular, they had to expand the venue. So I think it's just going to continue getting bigger and bigger. And last year when I was there, I mean, there were people from Kentucky, West Virginia, the Carolinas, Ohio, Michigan. I met someone there from New York. So like people are traveling to this.
Jasmine, we need multiple suitcases. We got to go kidnap sorcerers too.
Yeah.
But yeah, basically it's like a fancy like gala kind of ball where everybody dresses up and there's drinks and there's entertainment and there's vendors and everybody gets to be fancy and witchy for a night.
And there's booze. And also, like, not to brag, but like SCC will be performing a ritual for the event. So
I do believe there's a video on your social media of you guys dancing at the one last year, right?
yeah, we kind of worked our way to the middle of the dance floor and did some ceremonial magic, and it was very well received, and we were invited to do it officially. Because last year we were like, let's just do this, you know, be fun. It'll be wild.
It'll be wild.
Wild.
The SCC do put on a good show. Just gonna say.
Yeah, Jay, you gotta go.
Yeah.
Mikey. Did we decide what we were gonna do for the March show?
Which
Because
one?
the one in March, like we were thinking maybe around March 12th or something. I need to double check those dates with the Coven, but
So
I know that we're open to suggestions, you guys.
we are open to suggestions, and it seemed like you guys kind of liked it when we did like a casual conversation, just back and forth kind of episode. If you want, I was pitching to Jasmine that we should probably do one of those a month. Would you like a casual kind of conversation episode where there's not really a big theme once a month? Or do you just want one every once in a while? What would you guys like to see? What do you
And
want to hear us psychopaths talk about?
And we also need to do another reaction, whether we're reacting to the crazy witch hunts of the far right, whether we're doing that sort of reaction, or maybe by that time in March, we can finish because we've seen Suspiria, we've seen Mother of Tears. Only one left is Inferno. Maybe we can do a Three Mothers cosmology discussion. Because when you're talking about, when you're talking about like folklore and fiction informing modern practice, I feel very sort of guided and like resonant with the whole cosmology of the Three Mothers. So I think that would be fun. Watch Suspiria, the 2018 version. It's one of my favorite movies, and I've bullied all of my friends into watching it.
It is a really good movie. If you can watch it while a little bit, under the influence, it makes it even better. Whatever that influence is.
Period. Well, I think this is probably a good place for us to wrap up. I want to say thank you to Sorceress, then Blood, Sweat, and Steel, Woodland Magic, Craft and Magic, Jay, Sorceress, Rhonda, Kelvin, Haley, Mikey, Dark Moon Maid. Who else have we had in here? The Neon Cicada. Thank you for joining. I'm scrolling through our chat here. I wish there was a feature on StreamYard where I could just see people's usernames. Midnight Lace, thank you for joining. Mucky, thank you for joining. Yeah, this has been fun. You guys, when you finish the book, let's have a discussion underneath this video and like tell us what your thoughts of the book were.
And, if you want to come find us on social media and chat with us about the book too, I'm open to that as well.
Links will be in the description, so check out all of our links. And yeah, I think that, do you have any closing thoughts?
My closing thought is, if you are able to, get your hands on Slewfoot. It is an excellent book. I highly recommend the audiobook because the narrator for the audiobook does a fantastic job. I am so in love with doing these streams. We love interacting with all of you. We are building a really amazing community, and I hope that it continues to grow. And we just love y'all.
We love y'all.
We love y'all so much.
Y'all are great. Y'all are just wonderful.
Just wonderful.
Let me just make y'all a casserole.
And y'all encourage our ridiculous antics and allow us to be the most.
And on that note, blessed be everyone. Thank you for joining. And we will see you in hell. Bye.
Bye.
Happy full moon. Do the 28-day witchy challenge. Okay, bye.